In the summer of 1959, a car dealer in Michigan watched a customer climb out of a brand new sedan shaking, and not from excitement. He had just taken a full-size family car, the kind you'd expect to see parked outside a church on a Sunday morning, and pushed it past 110 miles an hour on a straight stretch of county road without meaning to. He wasn't reckless. He simply didn't know the car was capable of that. Nobody did. Because in the 1950s, something strange happened in Detroit, while America was busy building suburbs, raising kids, and buying station wagons. The same factories were quietly stuffing engines into ordinary cars that had no business being that dangerous. These weren't race cars, they weren't limited runs for rich collectors. They were sitting on dealership lots next to the family sedans, wearing the same badges, priced for regular working people. And when the average driver figured out what they'd actually bought, more than a few of them got scared. Today we're counting down 8 American cars from the 1950s that were so fast, so violently quick for their time, that they genuinely terrified the people who drove them. Every single one of these was a real production car, verified by the automotive press of the era, or timed at official speed trials, not a concept, not a one-off, not a rumor. Stick around until the end, because the car sitting at number 1 on this list is a full-size luxury sedan that could out-accelerate sports cars costing 3 times as much, and almost nobody today remembers it existed. And along the way, pay close attention to the names that keep resurfacing, because you're about to see how one engineer's decision in 1955 quietly set up the most famous muscle car ever built almost a full decade before anyone even knew that car would exist. Number 8 is the 1955 Ford Thunderbird. And if you only know the Thunderbird as a cruiser, a car for driving slow with the top down on a Sunday, you're about to see it differently. Ford unveiled it at the Detroit Auto Show in February of 1954. And by the time it hit showrooms as a 1955 model, something unexpected happened. Ford had projected they'd sell around 10,000 of these in the first year. Orders blew past that within days. Under the hood sat a Y-block V8 pushing out close to 200 horsepower, depending on the transmission, enough to snap the car to 60 in under 9 seconds and carry it past 110 miles an hour flat out. For a 2-seat personal car marketed toward comfort, leather seats, and optional air conditioning. That kind of raw acceleration caught a lot of first-time buyers off guard. People expected a stylish cruiser and instead got a car that could genuinely embarrass a Corvette in a straight line during those early years. Chevrolet sold barely 600 Corvettes that same season, while Ford moved over 16,000 Thunderbirds. And a huge part of that success came from buyers realizing this thing wasn't just beautiful, it was shockingly quick for something you could take your wife to dinner in. The 2-seat Thunderbird only lasted 3 model years before Ford turned it into a 4-seater. And that short window is exactly why the original remains one of the most fought-over collector cars from the entire decade. But if the Thunderbird surprised people, what happened next flat out changed the direction of the entire American auto industry. And it's why the 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air sits at number 7. Picture this. You walk into a Chevrolet dealership in 1955 expecting an ordinary family car, something your neighbor would drive, nothing special. And for under $2,000, you drive out with a machine wearing one of the most important engines in automotive history bolted under the hood. That engine was Chevrolet's brand new small block V8, a completely fresh design, lighter and more efficient than anything the company had built before. An engineer named Ed Cole spent months fighting to convince General Motors leadership to greenlight it. And when they finally did, the base version alone made over 160 horsepower. Add the optional 4-barrel setup, and that number climbed past 180. Popular mechanics clocked the upgraded version at somewhere between 8 and 8.5 seconds to 60. Numbers that, before 1955, you simply could not get without spending serious money on something exotic, or building it yourself in a garage. This was the first time an average American, with an average paycheck, could walk into a dealership, pay an ordinary sticker price, and drive home in something that was legitimately fast. Chevrolet sold over 770,000 of these that year, making it the best-selling car in America, and the small block engine underneath it became the foundation for generations of Chevy V8s that followed. 70 years later, engineers are still developing variations of that same basic architecture. Very few engines in automotive history can claim that kind of staying power, and it all started with a car that looked completely unremarkable sitting in a suburban driveway. Now here's where things get genuinely strange, because at number 6 we have a car most people alive today have never even heard of, the 1956 DeSoto Adventurer. Say the word DeSoto out loud to someone under 50, and watch them pause, trying to remember if that was even a real car brand. It was, and it operated as its own fully independent company inside Chrysler Corporation, with its own dealer network, from 1928 all the way to 1961. In 1956, DeSoto built one of the most overlooked high-performance machines of the entire decade, and they barely made any of them. The Adventurer came in exactly 2 colors, black or white, both wrapped in gold trim, so distinct that people called it the Golden Adventurer without anyone officially naming it that. Underneath sat a Hemi V8 displacing 341 cubic inches, fed by dual 4-barrel carburetor, rated at 320 horsepower. A number DeSoto themselves admitted was conservative. It ran 0 to 60 in roughly 8.5 seconds and hit a confirmed top speed of 137 miles an hour during Daytona Speed Weeks, with an even higher run of 144 clocked at Chrysler's own proving grounds. On July 4th of 1956, one of these actually competed at the Pikes Peak Hill climb, which tells you this wasn't built to look good sitting still in a showroom window. Chrysler only built 996 of them that entire year. DeSoto as a brand was gone by 1961, shut down entirely, when Chrysler started cutting losses during an economic downturn. And the name Adventurer disappeared right along with it, buried in a filing cabinet somewhere in Detroit, while faster, louder brands took all the credit for what DeSoto quietly proved first. At number 5, we go from forgotten to nearly extinct with the 1956 Packard Caribbean, a car built by a company fighting for its literal survival. There was a time, back in the 20s and 30s, when pulling up somewhere in a Packard told everyone watching everything they needed to know about your bank account without a single word being spoken. It was called the Rolls-Royce of America, and people genuinely believed that. But by the mid-1950s, Packard was losing badly against Ford, GM, and Chrysler, and the 1956 Caribbean was essentially the company's last real swing at proving they still belonged in the fight. Under the hood sat a 374 cubic inch V8, running dual 4-barrel carburetors and a high 10-to-1 compression ratio, producing 310 horsepower, which made it the single most powerful American production car built that year. Full stop. That's remarkable, considering Packard had only introduced their first V8 the year prior, arriving to the party years behind Cadillac and Chrysler. Top speed cleared 125 miles an hour, and the quarter mile ran under 16 seconds, numbers that shocked people who assumed Packard was a company coasting on reputation alone. The interior featured reversible seats, leather stitched on one side and formal fabric on the other, so an owner could flip the cushions depending on the occasion they were dressed for. The sticker price sat close to $6,000, roughly $70,000 in today's money, and Packard only built 539 of them total. 2 years later, in 1958, Packard was gone completely, swallowed by a failed merger with Studebaker that dragged both companies down together. Today, a clean, original Caribbean regularly clears $180,000 at auction. The final, beautiful, terrifyingly fast bow of a company that once ruled American roads and then vanished almost overnight. Now, if you think you've already heard the wildest car on this list, hold that thought, because everything from here to the top is about to escalate fast, and the next entry is the one that quietly invented an entire genre of American car nobody had a name for yet. Number 4 flips the entire script, because the 1957 Rambler Rebel came from the one manufacturer nobody expected any of this from. American Motors Corporation was the smallest of the American automakers at the time, known almost entirely for building small, cheap, fuel-efficient cars for people who specifically didn't want to spend much money. Then, in December of 1956, they did something completely out of character. They took a 327 cubic inch V8, making 255 horsepower, an engine that normally lived in their much larger Nash Ambassador, and dropped it into the significantly lighter Rambler body, a car that weighed barely over 3,300 pounds. That power-to-weight ratio was the entire story. Motor Trend clocked it at exactly 7.5 seconds to 60 at the Daytona Speed Trials in 1957, the best result posted by any American production sedan that year, and only a step behind the purpose-built 2-seat Corvette. The price tag was under $3,000, the lowest of any genuinely high-performance car sold that year. And automotive historians widely consider the Rebel the first factory-built intermediate performance car in American history, essentially inventing a formula that would define the entire muscle car era less than a decade later. AMC had even planned to install an early fuel injection system that would have pushed output to nearly 290 horsepower. But the technology proved unreliable, and not a single customer car ever received it. Only around 1,500 Rebels were built. And here's the part that stings. After posting one of the fastest times in the country, AMC did almost nothing with the momentum, quietly going right back to building economy cars and leaving that entire opportunity sitting untouched on the table for years, while other manufacturers watched, took notes, and eventually cashed in on exactly what AMC discovered first. If you thought that was as intense as the 50s could get, wait until you see what's coming. Because the top 3 on this list are where things get genuinely absurd. Cars fast enough that people at the time refused to believe the numbers on the spec sheet. At number 3 sits the 1957 Chrysler 300C, arguably the most striking car on this entire countdown. The Chrysler 300 letter series began in 1955 with the C300, a name pulled directly from its output of exactly 300 horsepower. Every year after that, Chrysler tacked on the next letter of the alphabet and pushed the numbers further. By 1957, they'd landed on the 300C, and many historians consider this exact model the visual high point of the entire letter series, even though the following year's 300D actually made more power. Sometimes the way something looks stays with you longer than any number ever could. Under the hood sat a Hemi Vate displacing 392 cubic inches, fed by dual 4-barrel Carter carburetors, producing 375 horsepower in standard trim, with an optional upgrade pushing it to 390. That optioned-up version ran 0 to 60 in 7.2 seconds, covered the quarter mile in under 16 seconds, and topped out around 131 miles an hour, numbers that came out of a car weighing over 4,000 pounds and stretching nearly 19 feet from bumper to bumper. Picture the length of that car, the sheer physical mass of it, and then picture it doing highway speeds inside 7 seconds. Legendary designer Virgil Exner penned the styling, those enormous sweeping tail fins and razor-sharp body lines that critics at the time actually called wasteful and excessive without realizing this exact car was the one they were complaining about. It earned the nickname, the Beautiful Brute, a car polished enough to take you to the opera and mean enough that nothing on American roads in 1957 wanted to challenge it in a straight line. A solid original today sells for anywhere between $80,000 and $120,000 at major auctions, and it earned every dollar of that. We're closing in on the top of this list now, and number 2 might be the single most audacious engineering move of the entire decade. The 1957 Chevrolet Corvette Fuelie, powered by the very first fuel injection system ever fitted to an American mass production car. No carburetor, no traditional fuel delivery, something genuinely radical for 1957. The engine displaced exactly 283 cubic inches and produced exactly 283 horsepower, hitting 1 horsepower per cubic inch, a threshold engineers of the era considered nearly impossible on a production vehicle. Chevrolet plastered that exact number across every national advertisement they ran, branding the system the Fuelie, one of the boldest marketing plays of the entire decade. The man behind it was Zora Arkus Duntov, a Belgian-born engineer who joined General Motors in 1953 and quickly became the single most important figure in shaping what the Corvette would eventually become. Here's the part that makes this genuinely unbelievable. Duntov developed this fuel injection system while recovering inside a full-body cast, following a serious accident at the GM Proving Grounds in 1956. He stood upright in that cast for months, working through the engineering by hand, refusing to let the injury stop him, and what came out of that determination permanently changed the trajectory of the Corvette forever. The finished Fuelie ran 0 to 60 in 5.7 seconds with a top speed of 132 miles an hour. Numbers that many far more expensive European sports cars simply could not touch in 1957. Total Corvette production that year came to just over 6,000 units, every one a convertible, but only about 1,000 of those carried the fuel injection system, and Chevrolet built exactly 43, with the ultra-rare cold air package on top of it. Owners eventually discovered the system was too complicated for most mechanics of the time to service, and plenty simply pulled it out and replaced it with a standard carburetor because nobody local could fix it when it failed. Fuel injection didn't return to the Corvette for another 25 years, Today, an original 1957 Fuelie sells for anywhere between $150,000 and $250,000. And the ultra-rare cold air versions are so scarce that nobody is entirely sure how many still exist. And now, the number one car on this list, the one that terrified people the most. And it's not what you'd expect. The 1957 Corvette we just talked about is objectively the faster car on paper. 5.7 seconds is a brutal number even today. But that Corvette was a purpose-built two-seat sports car designed from the ground up to do exactly one thing extremely well. The car at number one belongs to a completely different universe, and that's exactly why it's so unsettling. This is the 1959 Pontiac Bonneville equipped with the Tempest 420A option. A full-size luxury sedan weighing over 4,000 pounds, with room for 5 adults, air conditioning, leather seating, and in 1959, absolutely nothing else on American roads that fit that description could touch its speed. In the mid-1950s, Pontiac had a quiet reputation inside the industry, as the car conservative middle-aged buyers chose dependable, comfortable, forgettable, and absolutely nobody bought a Pontiac because they wanted to go fast. Then in 1956, a man named Seaman Bunky Knudsen became general manager and made it his personal mission to tear that entire reputation down. He brought in a young engineer named John DeLorean, pushed engine displacement higher every single year, put Pontiac into NASCAR competition, and by 1959, the brand had been completely rebuilt from the inside out. The 389 cubic inch Vate sat at the heart of the entire Pontiac full-size lineup that year, offered in several output levels starting at 260 horsepower in base trim, climbing all the way to 315 with the tri-power setup. 3 two-barrel carburetors linked together on a progressive system that kept only one open at gentle throttle and brought all 3 roaring to life the moment the driver demanded everything the engine had. But the Tempest 420A sat at the very top of that ladder, a 10.5-to-1 compression ratio paired with a specially retuned tri-power configuration producing 345 horsepower. A car weighing over 4,000 pounds running 0 to 60 in around 6.5 seconds. In 1959, no other full-size American sedan on the road could do that, and more than a few people who drove one for the first time genuinely didn't trust their own speedometer, convinced something had to be broken. Motor Trend named Pontiac its Car of the Year for 1959, and that same season Pontiac's full-size cars won NASCAR races at both Daytona and Darlington, proving this wasn't a fluke or a marketing exaggeration. Total Bonneville production that year crossed 77,000 units across convertibles, hardtops, and coupes combined. And here's the detail that ties this entire list together. That same 389 Vate is the exact engine John DeLorean later dropped into the smaller Tempest body in 1964 and called the GTO, doing precisely what American Motors had attempted with the Rambler Rebel 7 years earlier, except this time backed by the full resources of General Motors. And this time, America was finally ready for it. The 1950s remain the only decade in American history where genuine speed and genuine luxury weren't pulling in opposite directions. They were sitting in the same car, on the same showroom floor, priced for the same regular working family. The Chrysler 300C could leave everything else behind on the open highway and still get you to dinner looking sharp that same evening. The Packard Caribbean was the single most powerful American production car of 1956 and one of the most beautiful things anyone had ever parked in a driveway. The 8 cars on this list quietly taught an entire generation of Americans that real performance didn't have to come from a race shop or a European badge. It could roll straight off a Detroit factory floor with a warranty attached. And when the GTO finally exploded onto the scene in 1964, the country embraced it instantly, not because it came out of nowhere, but because the 1950s had spent an entire decade secretly sharpening the appetite for exactly that moment. So here's the question. Out of everything you just heard, which one actually got to you the most? Was it the Corvette Fuelie and that impossible 1 horsepower per cubic inch milestone? Was it the Chrysler 300C earning the name Beautiful Brute? Or was it that full-size Pontiac Bonneville sitting quietly at number 1, a family sedan that could genuinely scare its own driver? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if this list opened your eyes to a side of the 1950s you never knew existed, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Because there's a lot more forgotten American speed history where this came from.